As you know, in Brookline, over the last 10 years, there's been a significant rise in enrollment, really an unprecedented growth in enrollment. At our K-8 schools, the equivalent of 2 Lawrence schools have been added to our student population, nearly 1,400 students over a period of 10 years. And that is also impacting the high school. It's beginning to impact the high school. And as the students who are in the younger grades are moving up, you'll see in a slide in a moment, we will see very significant impacts in very short time in the high school. This is an enrollment projection out to 2024-25 on the graph. And what this shows is that through a very comprehensive enrollment study process that was undertaken by several town departments working together, the school department, the assessor's office, the planning department, and us, town administrator, team from the town administrator's office, a very comprehensive enrollment study. And what you can see is the enrollment at BHS, so this is BHS specific, is going to continue to grow without new housing development along the orange line. With the known housing developments that have been filed, right? So this does not include rumored developments. It does not include yet to be filed, but what we anticipate is coming. These are the filed proposals. You can see on the gray line that enrollment is expected to grow in this projection to about 2,600 students. The full preliminary enrollment report will be released shortly. It's just undergoing a few final edits, and so that will be posted on the district website shortly. This is another way to look at that, sort of a numeric way. From 2010-11 school year, just over 1,700 students, to the current enrollment, which is actually about 2,000 right now. It's gone up, so it's hovering right around 2,000. To sort of the 2 benchmarks, adding another 700 students to 850 to the 2021-22 school year, and the 2024-25 school year, taking us closer to 2,600 students, up from 2,000 now. And this is just, I mentioned a minute ago, students are here. So this is our current 1st through 4th grade enrollment, where the average class size, or grade size of the grade, was 654, and this enrollment is moving through our schools right now. One question I will address before it is asked: this year's kindergarten enrollment is lower. Devotions enrollment is down a fair amount, and that is typical of school construction projects throughout the Commonwealth. When a school undergoes massive renovation, you see lower enrollment. And Baker's is down due to renovations that are being done in Hancock Village, and a number of apartments that have been offline over a series of 2 years. So we see that as an isolated year, and our enrollment projections based on birth rate are again over 600 for next year for kindergarten. And again, just one other way to look at this, going from today through to 2024, and seeing another way for the growth. So there's a clear need for the space. One other thing I will say, and then I will hand over I'll say 2 other things before I hand this over to Anthony Meyer. One question is, well, why the need, right? When I was at BHS, X number of years ago, there were 2,400 students. State time on learning requirements have changed significantly, which requires more time in class, so study halls are basically a thing of the past, as well as differentiated needs. As we serve more students within Brookline, we need more space for English language learners, for special education students, for programs of students who were previously placed out of district who are now in district. There's a greater demand for the space. So really the confluence of all of that and changes in the way that education is delivered drives a need for more space within the existing facility. There's a very detailed explanation of that on the various presentations on the district website under the Capital Projects tab. And just very simply to answer what happens if we don't expand BHS, so we know students are coming. We are this year have recaptured the last of the spaces at BHS that were used for district-wide offices. This summer, they will be renovated back into classroom space. So we have another year or two of capacity in recapturing those spaces at BHS before we run out of space. And without an expanded BHS, really the only place to give as students continue to come, as the larger numbers continue to come, is in class size, which would drive an increase from an average of 21.5 students per class now to 27.5 in 2021. If you remember, 2021 was not the peak of the growth, and so that average would continue to go up closer to 30 by 2024-25. We also, our science rooms are really at this point unsafe for the size of the rooms. They are very small given current standards for space, which limits the enrollment in the science classes, which then limits sort of the overall capacity of the science program. Core spaces, and so when we talk about safety, I saw sort of potentially a few questions going through the room. If you think about a room that is 900 square feet versus the state standard of 1,400 square feet, when, for chemistry, for example, you're using gas, gas flames as a part of an experiment, it really limits both the capacity of the room for students and the number of students who can enroll in that program. It very much limits the use of the space. We can talk about more of that in the Q&A section. Our core spaces become inadequate. The cafeteria, for example, can no longer handle all of the students. This year, the high school had to go to 3 lunches instead of 2, and the only way to program that third lunch is what's called it's a split lunch, where students have half of a class, the first 20 minutes, 25 minutes of a class, go to lunch, and then return for the second 25 minutes of the same class. So lunch is in the middle of the class period, which is less than ideal, as well as the library, physical education, etc. And running out of space certainly for our special education programs, the students that were previously out of district, and insufficient faculty workspace.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you for being with us tonight. My name, as Andrew said, my name is Anthony Meyer. I'm the headmaster at Brookline High School, and it has been my pleasure to be in that role since June, and really to July 1 officially, but to take on this challenge, which is both offers myriad issues to deal with now, and then moving forward to plan for Brookline High School for the next 50 years. So I think one thing that's important to note is that this education plan, the work really goes back quite a ways. There have been many sessions, sort of planning sessions, to think about how we want to design the high school and how to design the school. I say again, for the next 50 years, when we take on a renovation like this, we want to imagine that it could work for the school at least for the next 50 years. So this builds on work that happened at Brookline High School, in which we convened multiple stakeholders, school department people, community members, parents, students, faculty members, to think about Brookline High School, what it is and what we want it to be. And so out of that emerged, toggle between glasses and no glasses. We'll get to that in a moment. If you haven't read the education plan, it's a 60-plus page document that we began drafting in earnest this summer. Again, it builds on earlier work, but this is work that we began on the actual drafting of the plan on July 1 and carried through into this fall. And we essentially articulate what should the program of Brookline High School look like now and into the future. And in the executive summary, we use 3 guiding questions, which I'll further summarize by just saying, how will we more deeply engage all students at BHS? How do we better serve all students so that they are connected to BHS? And how do we accommodate growth and expansion and still retain the essential unity, feel, and cohesion of the Brookline High School campus? So for number 1, We believe that Brookline High School has a long history of educational excellence. And yet we also feel like we can better support all of our students. That's our mission, and so we need to think about how we're engaging all of our students. In terms of connectivity, I would just say, especially as we look at a Brookline High School of 2,600 or 2,700 students, we need to be incredibly intentional about how we help them feel connected and be connected to the high school. That's through our courses, through our offerings, through our student support and administrative structure, through all of the decisions that we make. That needs to be at the forefront. And then 3 sort of speaks for itself. We have a campus, and one of the things that I think distinguishes Brookline High School from other high schools is it feels like a college campus in some ways. We give a great deal of freedom, we expect a great deal of responsibility, and so we want to think about what our campus looks like overall and whether there is cohesion. So quickly, out of the planning sessions that I spoke about before, several criteria emerged. I just was speaking to the first, the idea that we need to retain a small school feel within a big school. We absolutely want to imagine connections between departments and programs and disciplines. So as many interdisciplinary offerings as we can have. We want to break down the silos of traditional departments while frankly retaining those departments. And so you'll see that if you've looked at the executive summary or looked at the education plan, that is articulated. That second bullet point is articulated. So self-directed, hands-on, and experiential learning sort of speaks for itself. You'll see throughout the education plan the need for flexible learning spaces. We want individual world language classes to be able to do the work that they generally do, say within learning Spanish, but then maybe also have somebody come in and offer oral history from somewhere in Latin America and be able to bring the 3 classes together, or history classes that might be working on a particular project and then come together to present some of their work, not only to the peers in their classes, but their peers in other classes. So the more that we can kind of accordion in and out with classrooms. I believe I just came up with a verb, accordion. It's not officially a verb, but it's something to think about. I have a very dry sense of humor. I'll find myself funny, and you might. I apologize. But I do think that idea of flexible learning spaces is key. And then we want to make sure that we're using the entire campus. Frankly, I'd go beyond that and say we also want to make sure that we're connecting our students to the world outside of Brookline High School. We have incredible human resources in this community and in the greater Boston community, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we're connecting our students to those people and those institutions. So whether it's bringing people in from universities, which I think we do quite a bit, or businesses or organizations, it's also about sending our kids out, our young people out into the world too, and so thinking about how we do that as well. And then, you know, we want to think in as many ways as we can about sustainability. So it's also important that as we eye the future and planning for the future, that we're making sure we're taking care of our students in the meantime. I believe that we're doing that. I believe that we will continue to do that. I think having some specifics around this is important. So soon we will learn which design alternative we will go with. And it will be really important for us to plan for what spaces might be taken sort of offline and what we're going to do as a result. So that, that bullet point has not begun. I will say that planning for Old Lincoln, so the high school will be able to use Old Lincoln beginning not this coming September, but September 2018. We are already engaged in internal discussions about how we might use that space, who might use that. I'll just say what I've said before. It is not big enough to have a freshman or a 9th grade campus. That's what we've done in the past, but Old Lincoln at best holds about 450 students. So we're not envisioning a 9th grade campus, but we want to think about how to use that space. And if you haven't been in Old Lincoln over the last few years, I'll just say, having toured it recently, it looks beautiful. The work that they've done since some of our kids were there when Rumpel was there, it's unbelievable what the building department and the school department has done to work on Old Lincoln School. So we're excited about that and thinking about an annex of Brookline High School. And then we're doing work now. And so part of that is, Andrew said, we have enough space. We know we have enough space for next year. And part of why we know that is because we're converting 5 classrooms and making, some tenants are leaving, and we're converting some other spaces to create 5 additional classrooms. Andrew toured the school, Brookline High School, this fall and noticed large class sizes that we've been talking about for a while in some of our senior classes. And so part of our FTE allocation in the budget, part of the funding that we've received, is to address some of those large class sizes in a junior math class or in a senior world language class. So I think we want to make sure we cap class sizes. Ben's team of Sarah Baker and Ben Lummis have helped us. Really, they've led in drawing, in creating this document, which just talks about some of the new programs, new courses that we're offering this year. And to me, they speak to this idea of making sure that we have broad offerings, that we're figuring out ways to engage kids, and we're also creating havens. One course that's not on here that's we've offered for the last several years is global leadership, and we want to both continue to offer that and have be a one-time experience for kids, as well as imagining more extensive use of that program as a kind of haven for students. But there are several new classes. We're super excited quickly about having computer programming live within the math department. It traditionally has been taught within the career and technology education. We're excited about that. We have 2 offerings in social studies, one AP Human Geography, and another standard level class called Beyond the Headlines, Current Events and Media Literacy. But you'll see several new classes. The idea being, yes, we're going to hopefully renovate and expand BHS, but that does not mean, sorry, let me word it positively, we can still make moves in the right direction now without modifying the building. And so that's what's behind creating new courses and new opportunities for students. I've asked that an eclectic group of educators at the high school perform a review of our alternative programs. We have 2 mainstream alternative programs, School Within a School, SWS, and ACE, Alternative Choices in Education. I think it's essential that we take a close look at those programs and say, what are their purposes? What is the cost of these programs? Who's enrolled? How successful are they according to various measures? And determine, do we have the right alternative programs? If so, how can we expand them for a larger Brookline High School? If we don't, what do we need? And to engage in a conversation about alternative programs, and I would say more broadly, alternative programming at the high school. And then also looking at administrative and student support structure. As I mentioned, beginning in 2018, we will be at the Old Lincoln School. That's one small factor in this. In general, we want to be looking carefully at our resources and determining, how do we take care of students? How do we monitor them? How do we intervene quickly to support kids who are struggling academic or socio-emotionally? So that piece is something that we've begun and will continue to work on, so that as we eye an expanded BHS, we also have begun to make moves to make sure we're supporting kids in the ways that we want to. We want to know our students well and take care of them. Okay, so I'm going to be here to answer some questions as well. Thanks for your time. I don't know why I'm going to give you this document.
Hi, I'm pleased to be here. I'm Pitt Lewis. I'm principal at HMFH Architects, and we're the architects who are working with the town and the school to go through this process.
A little louder?
We're the architects who are working with the town to go through this process. And we really are a firm in Cambridge that focuses on the design and construction of places for education. And we are also responsible for the Edward Devotion School renovation and expansion that's going on in town right now. So we're pleased to be here. It's right at the beginning of the process. We're in feasibility study. And a little bit later, someone will talk a little bit about the timeline for the process. I'm going to show you some of the options that we've looked at, and importantly, some of the costs of the options. One of the things I want to assure you is that this is a very large and complicated project. It's large because we're designing for a student population of 2,700 students. You saw the enrollment projections a little bit earlier. It's complicated because it's right in the middle of a residential area. It doesn't have a whole lot of land around it, and it has a lot of existing buildings to reuse. So we're going to be doing what we call occupied phase renovation within the existing campus. Going in the wrong direction. So this is just to show you very briefly the scope of what we're looking at. This is the existing high school campus, mainly located off of Cypress Field. There's also the large Tappan Gymnasium building, and there's the Unified Arts building here. In the midst of it is the pool, which is run by Recreation, and so that's not so intensely a part of the project. We're also looking at parcels across the tracks here that the town owns called Lot 23, parking lot located here, and other spaces that we can find around the campus. Now, because this is such a large and complicated project, one of the things we were asked is, are there ways that we can look at different levels of sort of the implication of the project? And so what we have done is we've established 3 guiding statements to sort of help us to sort of determine sort of a minimum, an average, and a full build-out plan that are based on 3 relatively simple statements. One statement is, well, let's say that the Brookline High School at the moment currently accommodates 2,000 students satisfactorily. Therefore, what we need to do is to accommodate 700 more with the minimum renovations that are required to accommodate the population. And then we want to improve the science department because everyone agreed that the science department was really strongly deficient. Second guiding statement is, let's do the Brookline High School in accordance with the standards that are used by most high schools around in the state of Massachusetts. Most high schools are funded by the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, and so we're finding a lot of the high schools are really based on the space guidelines that are established by the MSBA. And the third guiding statement is to say, over the last 2 years, the Brookline High School and the town have been involved in various visioning sessions and a process of putting together the educational plan that was talked about before. And let's, in this option, let's look at the accommodation of all of the goals of the education plan. And I can tell you that this is small, medium, and large. And we'll go through that. There's implications with the cost. You'll see all of that as we go through this. First, I want to show you that in order to develop each of these options, there was a lot of sort of background that we did in terms of analysis of the sites, how the buildings were constructed, and we're going to this was building on those. Our options were building on the information that we gleaned on the site. Now, what we've done is we've developed option number 1, which is enrollment accommodation, number 2, Mass High School standards, and number 3, the Brookline High School education plan. And we've established this qualitative chart, which will give you a very sort of general sense of the amount of intervention that each of these plans has. I'll show you the schemes in a second, larger scale, so don't try to focus on that too much. But if you look across here, for this, in various categories, we look at extent of demolition, types of renovation, new construction, and the length of this bar indicates the amount of the intervention we're doing. So if you go from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, the amount of new construction, for instance, goes from minimal to larger and larger. The amount of demolition goes from minimal to more and more, and the amount of renovation changes as you go through the process. At the top is the main is focusing on the main campus, which is the main high school on Greeno Street. The bottom is showing the Tappan gym and the Unified Arts Building, the UAB, and we're sort of going through the same process there of showing the amount of intervention of each scheme. So the existing campus is like this, and I want you to focus on these 3 buildings across the front of the campus, because one of the things we found is that academically, these are the least dense academically on the campus. And so when we look at how we could do interventions to replace portions of them or to expand portions of them, we look to those places because it's sort of the easiest way to accommodate this growth while still operating a high school on the campus. And so you'll see that we take this building, which I'm going to call the Tappan, because this is Tappan Street, academic wing, and we're always looking at replacing it first because it has some extra space with the parking lot located here. We're able to, if we can temporarily relocate these classrooms, we can build a much larger facility to accommodate growth, and that allows freedom to grow into other portions of the project. So you can see in yellow, and this is really just a massing diagram. It's not a design at all, but this is us showing the people we're working with how much building we're talking about as we look at these various options. This is the low-level option. We're accommodating the enrollment, and what we're doing is we're taking down that Tappan academic wing, replacing it with a much larger facility here, 4 stories high, which accommodates the science program, which has been relocated out of the 3rd floor of this wing here, which is where it's currently located, into here. And we're also building a small academic wing facing into the courtyard located here. If you're familiar with the courtyard, we're sort of going from the MLK room back into the courtyard a little bit, still leaving a large part of the courtyard available as open space, but sort of rethinking the courtyard and energizing it a little bit, making use of some of that space. Still leaving all of the historic facades facing into the courtyard. And what you'll see is that we have this large building right on the corner of Tappan and Greeno, with the academic building facing into the courtyard. We're always expanding the cafeteria, which at the moment is located under the auditorium, out toward Tappan Street in this direction so that it gets more height and more daylight. And importantly, I want to point out that in this scheme, where we're just accommodating the enrollment, the Schlunch gym, which is your competition gym, remains in place. Now, on top of this, and that has major implications I'll get to with later plans. On top of the Schlunch gym, where you at the moment have about 8 science labs, we're proposing that become a new, expanded, and reimagined library space. again, the new science clusters and the academic spaces that are being built on, replacing the tap and wing and into the courtyard. The color that you see here is old science facilities that are being repurposed into classrooms and collaborative spaces to serve the population. Back to the existing, if we go further and we try to design this in accordance with the standards we're seeing in most Massachusetts high schools, which is a bigger program, improves various facilities that are not being improved by just accommodating enrollment, music, athletics, and things like that. You will find that we're first replacing this building, and then once we relocate science, we're able to take this building, which is composed of the lunch gym with science labs on top of it, and place a new building there. And you get something along this line. There's the building at Tappan. There's the academic addition into the courtyard, but a new academic building replacing the Schlunch gym. Now, when you take out the Schlunch gym, this is why I said this is important, you lose your competition gym. That means you have to rediscover the competition gym inside of the Tappan gymnasium. And I'll go into that in a little bit later, but this way you start seeing major renovations going on at the Tappan gymnasium. One of the things that causes is that you have this construction here, plus you have the construction over here. Now I want to point out that in the enrollment accommodation option that I showed you before, where you're not required to replace the Schlunch gym, you have flexibility with what you do with Tappan. You can renovate Tappan and improve it. You're not being forced to by the fact that you're getting rid of the Schlunch gym and having to refine the Schlunch gym inside of Tappan. The floor plans are similar to the other one, with the exception that you have a large academic building where the Schlunch gym currently is, and so you wind up with these two new buildings flanking the administration building. Then, in order to accommodate everything that is in the town's education plan, and it was stated earlier that if you haven't read it, you should read it, because it really is an excellent document. It's very clear and insightful. In order to accomplish all the square footage that we need for this, what we are seeing is we have to replace these buildings one by one, because we don't have enough student capacity to take them all out at once. We can't relocate people temporarily, so that you have to build this in a phased way. And what you're essentially doing is you're creating an entirely new facility along Greeno Street with a lot more square footage and an entirely new academic building that gives you something like this. Again, this is just massing, showing you how much square footage is required. And what you would do is you would build that chunk at Tappan there. You would build either this chunk secondly, and fill in the middle, so you're doing it step by step by step, so at any time you're not displacing too many kids. And in order to accommodate this, we found that we had to also build in the courtyard, to build a new facility, which is a 400-seat theater, cafeteria, and a new library for the school, all part of the education plan. Because we're removing the Schlunch gym from here, we have to go over to Tappan and create a new competition gym. The education plan also calls for a field house, which is a large facility. And so we've come up with this idea where we take the pavilion, if you know the tennis pavilion that's on the top floor of Tappan, and we actually can take the floor of it and sort of extend it out over the top of the pool to create this large field house facility. The pool still remains in operation, but we sort of straddle on either side of the pool with new columns to support this field house. And here you can see a very different sort of design where you're building step by step a large facility really across the whole facade of Greeno Street, plus significant construction inside of the courtyard. We have a theater located here that will sort of augment the auditorium that you had, which remains. You have a cafeteria in sort of an atrium space or a skylit space in the courtyard, and we keep about a third of the courtyard open for natural daylight and air. And as you go up through the building, you see this large facility that accommodates all of the required spaces. Plus, you see this library facility in the middle of the courtyard with the cafeteria sort of atrium space located adjacent to it, in the courtyard located over here. Looking at Tappan really quickly, when you look at the enrollment option, you will see where you're accommodating enrollment, you'll see you have flexibility with what you do with Tappan. And so here we've shown a sort of a minimal sort of upgrade to some of the areas, particularly on the lower floors of the Tappan gymnasium, to improve the locker rooms and the training rooms and wellness centers and things along those lines. But the major spaces remain as they are. There's a tennis pavilion. On the second floor, if you're familiar with the building, there's a large basketball gymnasium, and then there's something called a small gym, which is fitted out as a climbing gym. That all remains pretty much as is. If you go to the option number 2, where we have to recreate a competition gym at Tappan, you will see on the second floor a new competition gym is created. And just to go back for a second, what we're doing is we're taking out, there's a non-structural wall that separates those two gyms. There's a mezzanine space that's used for fitness right now, what's used for boxing. And we're talking about taking those out and creating one large gymnasium that can be divided with a movable partition or even a net, so you still get 2 spaces except when there's a gym going on, and adequate bleachers and things like that. But actually be a much nicer competition gym than the one you have at the Schlunch gym right now. The pavilion remains pretty much as it is, but we're also showing some renovations to the lower 2 floors of the school, of the building, basement, first floor, second floor. And as we look at the utilization, we see that in addition to the competition gym, we need to add another small gym between the pool building and the tall portion of the Tappan gymnasium. Now, to go to the education plan, where there's a field house added, I want you to notice what happens to the pavilion. This is the Kieran pool, located really below that level. And what we have to do here is expand, sort of take that wall out and expand it out in that direction in order to get a 200-meter track and a full field house, sort of hovering above the pool, having the effect of really sort of unifying the cluster of buildings into one large facility. And with the vertical circulation and things like that that need to go in, new lobby spaces and things along those lines, we're placing those all sort of facing onto Tappan Street. So the building appears to be a new building if you stand and look at it. It's actually still the renovated Tappan Gymnasium and the Kieran Pool. But as you stand on Cypress Field and look at it, it will look like you have built an entirely new facility. Now I want to talk about numbers for a second. And I want to say that at the moment, here's option 1, option 2, and option 3. Enrollment accommodations, state standards, and the education plan. We're all starting with 69 classrooms. And we wind up in just accommodating enrollment with 92 classrooms, 95 and 98. And I won't go into the subtle differences as to why they're slightly different numbers. But the important thing to point out here is that where you're simply accommodating the enrollment and you're making use of all the classroom spaces that you have right now, even though some of those classroom spaces are undersized, we find that there are 29 classrooms in the existing building that we would renovate and reuse them as classrooms, but they are undersized. We're then renovating 42 classrooms and building 21 new classrooms. As you go up in the standards, you will find that there are only 5 undersized classrooms in the state standards option. And in the education plan, there are no undersized classrooms. So everything that's an undersized classroom, either by repurposing that classroom as a conference room or a small group room or something like that, we're taking it out of service as a classroom and making it another purpose, and then we're replacing it with new classrooms. So here you're building 21 new classrooms. Here you're building 52 new classrooms, even though you're accommodating the same student population. A decision we made as we went along is in all of these options, because everyone is so concerned about the science labs and the safety in the science labs, that really under all the options, we've determined that we should build a new science facility. So that doesn't change. If you look at the other facilities that are in the building, you can sort of go through this simple chart and sort of will tell you what we're doing to various significant spaces. For instance, in the first 2 options, we're expanding the existing cafeteria. In the third option, we're building a new cafeteria in that courtyard space. Anthony talked extensively really about the collaborative learning spaces and things like that would be sought to achieve in the new facility. And these are spaces that might range in size from small groups where a cluster of kids might get together and work on something like the picnic tables that are in the corridor of the high school, if you're familiar with those, to larger rooms where you get 3 classrooms together to work on a project. And so in option 1, we're doing a little bit of that. In option 2, a moderate amount, and in option 3, a more significant amount. I want to say that the school is experimenting right now with collaborative spaces, and so as we go through this process, we're going to be able to sort of fine-tune what we actually provide to what the school has determined actually works for it. You will see that under option 1, the black box theater, we keep the existing, and it gets replaced with an improved black box theater as you go up in the options. You'll see that an additional dance studio appears in the higher options. You will see that the 400-seat theater that I showed you that sits in the middle of the courtyard, that augments the auditorium, is only done in the total total option 3 education plan. And then with the physical education spaces, the Schlunch gym, as I talked about, in option 1, you keep the existing, which means that Tappan, you can keep the existing, or you can do a minor renovation or as much renovation to Tappan as you want. Whereas in option 2, if you take the Schlunch gym out of where it is, it has to be replaced at Tappan, which means that you have to do a moderate renovation and expansion at Tappan. And in option 3, you're also moving into Tappan, but you're adding that field house, so it becomes a larger Tappan project. And then this is just talking about total the square footages of the different options, because people are always pointing out to us how the square footage doesn't change that much between option 2 and option 3. And really, if you include the square footage of the unrenovated, or renovated if you like, Tappan gym, that gets up into that area also. But the difference is that under the lower options, you're renovating a lot more space, and a lot of this is just light renovations. You're making do with the undersized classrooms and things like that, as I talked about. And you're building less space. As you move through these options, you're renovating less space and you're building more new space. You're providing new modern facilities as you go up through the options. And these are numbers. And as I said, this is a complicated and expensive project. But I want to show you just where the sort of the scale of these options are. And then I'll show you how it compares with what other communities are doing in Massachusetts. So under option 1, we have a range at this point of construction costs that varies from $168 million to $184 million, or $62,000 per student up to 68. And then we have an array of what I'm calling sort of other optional projects. And those projects include the renovation of the Tappan Gymnasium, for instance, providing parking in some way on the campus, and the renovation of the Cypress Field with artificial turf and new bleachers and lights and things like that. And that can get you up with this low range option to $245 million. These numbers I'm talking about here are total project costs, so that's the hard costs of the actual construction itself, plus the soft costs of all the things that go in, that also go into making a building. So it's the cost of the surveys, the cost of the architect's fees, the cost of geotechnical tests, the cost of textbooks, the cost of furniture. That's all sort of rolled up into these numbers here. So that should be your total cost. With option 2, we have a range that goes from $258 million to $286 million. If you do other optional projects, it can get you to $336 million. I do want to point out, because you have taken the Schlentz Gym out of operation here, you've gone into Tappan and you've done a renovation to Tappan. So the renovation to Tappan isn't an option, yet you have to renovate Tappan in order to do this. So the Tappan renovation is in here. That's one reason why there's such a jump in cost between this option and these options down here. That no longer becomes an optional, it's a required task. And in option 3, where you're sort of doing the full build out, and we have a number of about 348,000. And if you redo the, million, and if you redo the Cypress Field with artificial turf and things like that, we have this number here of $363 million. And I say in this, the Tappan renovation is included in this base cost, plus the parking is included, because if we're building a large facility across Greeno Street, you can put parking on the lower, sort of the basement levels of the building more economically than just about anything else. And then this is really just to compare, just to see where these Brookline High School options are. There's the low range and there's the high range, compared to what we see other communities are doing in Massachusetts right now. And what I did was I just looked at the high schools I could find that were larger than 1,000 students that are being done now, to sort of see where they fell in terms of how much they were spending per student. And the Brookline High School is ranging from $62,000 per student up to $134,000 per student. And what we're seeing here is an array of projects that range from $107,000, $108,000 per student up to $166,000 per student. And so the lower ranges of what Brookline is anticipating is lower than what most communities are spending per student, because you have a lot of existing facilities that you're reusing. And the highest range of what is being anticipated here is not as high as some of these larger facilities are expending on a per student basis. Most of these are new construction, but some are Somerville High School and Lowell are renovation and addition projects. And I just tried to pull in all the ones that I could find the data on. It sort of puts it in the context of where you are. And that just gives you a very general sort of overview of what we've been looking at, the 3 different options that we've looked at, and significantly the cost ranges of what we've been looking at.
Okay. So in the span of about 47 minutes, we try to get you updated on a lot of work that's happened over many, many months. And I hope folks appreciate just whether it's an educational plan, which is said 60 pages and dozens of people working, or the work that HMH and the Building Committee has done. There's really hundreds and hundreds of pages of data, of work, of analysis that go behind all this. So we know it's quick, we know it's a lot of information, but we do want to give folks a chance the next half an hour or so to ask your questions and comments. And also other ways, there are sheets in the back which you write down comments on. We'll put those in the FAQs that are on the website, and also on the website. You can also submit comments or questions as well, and certainly anybody in the building committee is certainly reachable as well. So I'll facilitate questions. I will repeat your questions so they can get on camera, and really the building committee members will be the ones answering it. It just depends on what your question or comment is. So with that, Charlotte, we'll begin with you.
Okay, Pip, thanks so much. I'm so glad you're here doing this because I think you've done a great job with the DeVito renovation. So my question is, why did you decide not to look at that land that's across the tracks?
So the question is, is why have we not yet looked at 111 Cypress, which is
I think she means lot.
sorry.
Yeah.
Lot 23?
Yes.
Right. Which I always get confused with Area 51.
Yes.
But can you explain what Lot 51 is?
And I can also explain what Area 51 is. So we did that, but that was presented to us. We did look at that. We looked at it mainly, well, with two things. We looked at, could we get an academic building over there? Because it's behind the Tappan Gym, we found it very difficult to get access to the academic building. We couldn't see anything like practical idea of replacing the Tappan Gym with the whole academic building and then rediscovering a new Tappan Gym somewhere else with all of those wonderful facilities that it has. So then we said, well, what can we do that's athletic? So extending the Tappan Gym in that direction. We looked at the idea of the field house, for instance, in the option 3, stretching across the tracks and sort of landing on the other side, using the air rights over the tracks. And we pursued that until we realized that we could extend the field house over the top of Kieran Pool. And that seemed like a much better option without having to deal with the MBTA and without having to deal with access from lot 23, which is kind of difficult from Clark Road and from Brington. There's some relatively narrow access paths and things like that. It's also a very steeply sloped site. And so we just thought it would be a lot less of a headache and make actually a better presence on the campus if you did the strange option of actually building on top of Kieran Pool.
Just as context, the area we're talking about is around right about here across the MBTA tracks. It's a piece of land that the town owns, was under consideration.
And it slopes steeply down to the tracks, and it's totally surrounded by residential houses without the frontage on a street over there.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to know about the 111 Cypress lot. I mean, it's the parcel 51. And how did you decide not to consider that for development? I guess about a year ago we had a neighborhood meeting and a meeting here at Town Hall where the neighborhood of Brington Road was unanimously in favor of having the high school expand to that site. And so I think we're here wondering what about that?
So just for Big TV, question is, are you considering, or will you, or have you considered the 111 Cypress property?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Wilton-Kopp. I'm the co-chair of the Building Committee, along with George Cole from the Building Commission, and Nancy Heller, who's on the Board of Selectmen, but unfortunately couldn't be here this evening. It's a great question. I don't think anyone has taken 111 Cypress off the table at this point. I think the initial question to the architects that the Building Committee posed was, is it possible, and if so, how much would it cost to build on land that the town already owns? And so that's what you're seeing, is sort of building on land that the town already owns. There is a assumption, and I'm going to underscore the word assumption, that it would be cheaper to build on land that we already own because you don't have to buy new land. And there's an assumption that it would be faster, same thing, to build on land that we already own. I think one of the things that we all, though, said at the time was that, and have said in the Building Committee meeting process, is, you know, when we get far enough along in this process that it needs to go before voters or taxpayers or neighbors or anyone else, that obviously it's really important to make sure that those assumptions are accurate assumptions, that it actually is cheaper, it actually is faster. And so one of the things that, so that this has come up in the Building Committee meetings, and so one question that the Building Committee has asked back of the architects, and they're just not there yet, is to say, okay, so these are three options are very well thought through. What is the comparison of this to quote unquote greenfield construction, meaning pretend you had an empty lot? What would that cost? And then you have to add on top of that site acquisition. So how much would it cost to purchase or take that land? So that is sort of I think 111 Cypress falls into that category. So I would say it's a long-winded way to say it's not off the table. It's kind of part of the discussion about what is the alternative to building on this piece of property. I will say that the educators have given us pretty clear guidance that they would like something nearby. So one question obviously is Old Lincoln is sort of another question of Old Lincoln seems close enough. But in fact, you have to, depending on what you wanted to do with Old Lincoln, first of all, it's not big enough, so you would probably still need to do site acquisition and improvement. And it's not quite as walkable. It's about a 15-minute walk, 15-minute walk. And obviously there are students with disabilities who might not be able to do that very easily, so you need busing and scheduling. So there are kind of a variety of different things that happen when you start to look at other pieces of property nearby. And then obviously there's something that's much further away, like a second high school entirely, which the school committee we kind of had a long conversation about whether 2 high schools was where we wanted to go. We kind of backed off from that. So it's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think there are it touches a number of different pieces. And I think the question back that the architects are going to give to us more guidance on is, well, what would it look like to explore a greenfield site? How much would it cost, or ballpark, and what would you do with it? And that's so that's where 111 Cypress fits in. It's sort of still to come a little bit. Does that make sense? Right.
And also just to add that, because you may not know this, it may not be obvious from what we said already, is the presentation you saw, the Building Committee just saw for the first time on Monday night. So this is very new information for everyone involved in the project, which is, I think, really important to realize.
I just had a question for the architects real quick. First of all, thank you for the presentation. Definitely easier to see things once they're mapped out. On the comparisons, were those comparisons like for like, or did they include any land acquisition costs?
So let me just repeat the question.
Yeah. So
Repeat the question.
yes. So the question.
Or you can repeat the question.
The question was, were the comparisons to other schools that we looked at similar comparisons, or did they include acquisition costs? And I think my specific answer is the ones I know about did not include acquisition costs, but there might be some where I was getting information off of the MSBA website that had acquisition costs in there and that I don't know about. So the ones I know about, no, it did not include acquisition costs.
Thank you.
My question kind of piggybacks on this previous one. In your list of comparable school building expansion, why was Newton North, for example, not included as a comp, since that's our closest neighbor and is only a few years old?
So the question is, why was Newton North not included in the comparables?
Yes, and the reason why it wasn't included is because it's actually so old compared to the others that it really almost becomes not a relevant comparison. Everyone thinks about Newton North, so I know what the numbers are in my head. Because it was the big, expensive high school. Now, going through the MSBA, are several high schools, all of which are, not all of which, but several high schools that are more expensive than Newton North. Newton North, I went back into when it was built, and the cost of it back then, which was $197.5 million. And I escalated it to about when we plan on doing the construction here. And I got a project of about $250 million. And that gives you about $125,000 per student.
Thank you.
Yes.
In that same slide where you had the per student cost, were you using the projected number of students at those other high schools like you are for Brookline, or were you using the current number of students?
The question is, on this chart, where we're using the projected number of students or the current number of students, and what we're using is more like the projected number, because what we call it is the design enrollment. So it's the number that each of the schools was designed to accommodate. As the number here, we've been asked to design for 2,700 students. Each of these communities was asked to design a school of a certain number.
This gentleman, and then
So I'm a parent of a 8th grader and an 11th grader, and I thought the presentation was great. It makes a lot of sense. The question though is, so I hear from my 11th grader that the cafeteria is already so full that she often can't sit down for lunch. There's no place to sit down for lunch. So it feels like it's already, with the 3 periods, very overcrowded. So I'm looking at these options, and what I'm seeing is space coming out of use and more kids coming in while that's happening for a 4-year period. And I understand we are where we are, and everyone's doing their best to figure this out. My question is that I would imagine there must be some analysis of, okay, where is overcrowding a problem now? Where is it going to get worse over the next 4 years as all this happens? What can we mitigate and what can't we mitigate? And how, is there any way for us as parents to get visibility into that for the next 4 years?
yeah. So the question is essentially, I'm going to paraphrase and I hope I don't, is what are we doing to prepare for the growth that's going to happen between now and the expansion, and how can parents and the community sort of get insight and get awareness of where the pinch points are, where the challenges are, and what's being done to address those challenges over the next 3, 4, and 5 years while the project's being done.
Yeah.
So a great question. I think to your final question, a great point about getting the information out. Anthony talked about some work that we've done this year where there are already some pinch points in terms of class size and sort of previous budgetary decisions where we are making move. For example, the honors geometry classes that are all at 30, 31 students, how do we bring that down before anything even happens, right? So how do we start addressing it? And so there are several areas where we're engaged in that work, and we need to get that information out. And then I think too is capturing where the pinch points are. You mentioned the cafeteria. There's also a pinch point at the library, and what we know about the library is we know when it fills. We know sort of the number of students that use it sort of on an average basis. We don't know if it's the same number of students, it's sort of the same core students who are always using it, but we can start putting together sort of how often is a librarian having to shut down anyone else coming into the library so that that information is available. The question about how we solve it is very much going to depend on what the decision or the recommendation of the building committee and ultimately what the town decides. We've started looking at Old Lincoln so that we understand the space, understand the walk. Anthony and I walked it so we could get a sense. We tried to walk it at sort of the average speed of a 10th grader.
We won't get into the specific metrics we were using.
We noted the Dunkin' Donuts along the way, sort of what the time deferral for Dunkin' Donuts would be. So there are many potential ways of using Old Lincoln, but we can't really answer specifically how that can be used to mitigate space until we really understand what is the scope of the construction, what's the phasing that's required, what spaces are online, offline, but have begun doing the preliminary work so that as these decisions are made, we can very quickly get answers out about here are the ways that it can be mitigated, here are ways where there are going to be pinch points. The library will likely close, once a day, during X block because of capacity, as a possible example.
I think just to add to Andrew, I think your example of the cafeteria is a good one, and why we went from 2 lunches to 3 lunches, which is not ideal. So then we needed to figure out how do we make sure that structure isn't impacting only a few disciplines, and so we're sharing the pain of that split lunch. And there are some departments who actually like it, the way that it splits up the class and splits up activities. I think we can communicate better about where those pinch points are and what we're doing to address those. I think even internally with our own faculty, I think we're trying to be much more ahead of things. We know what 5 classrooms we're adding. We know what spaces are being converted. And so we're working with our faculty council and with our faculty in general to say, here are the spaces and here's when it's happening. So I use that as an example as how we should be working with the public. And I, in meeting the 8th grade families through a series of transition events, have tried to emphasize what I think is most important, or who's most important beyond our students. It's our teachers and the work that they do, and I believe strongly that is the most sacred work that happens at the school, and that will continue to be excellent. And so I think in general, I want to just say how committed we are to 8th grade families and to that transition going well, and for us to continue the traditions that your 11th grader has experienced in terms of coming into the high school and transitioning to a really terrific 4-year experience.
We're also just to add one more thing is we are working to learn from high schools, similarly sized high schools, how they're doing programming to, again, depending on the construction decision, the design decision, what it takes to successfully phase. There are plenty of schools that have gone through similar projects, and lessons learned. How do we learn from what went well as what didn't go so well, so that we can really be out ahead on planning. Even before any construction decisions are made, I think next week or the following week, we're visiting a school that was just recently built, so we can start understanding the decisions that were made around some of the design spaces, how those new spaces are being used, what we can learn, so that we can then work with the architects, the team of architects, to give some additional guidance. So that's just as one example of how we can learn from communities throughout the Commonwealth that have done this and have done it well.
Yes, I have a question that's somewhat peripheral, but I was wondering how integral the renovation of Cypress Field and replacement with artificial turf is to the project. And I just want to point out that environmentally, it's equivalent to putting a parking lot there, and you're really going to increase the urban heat island. and being an abutter of Cypress Field, and also a member of the Selectmen's Climate Action Committee, I'm very concerned about that. So I'd just like to hear, you know, is that a done deal, and is that a Parks and Rec kind of process? I just would like to understand a little bit more about that.
Do you want first?
Nancy, do you want to?
So the question is about Cypress Field and whether or not it becoming a turf field is a done deal, and what is, yeah, and what else is planned for that. Nancy, Connor, will.
Sure, I have no answer. Nancy O'Connor of the Park and Rec Commission. This is all new, and as far as we know, this is one of the options that's on the table, is having an artificial turf field. It's funny, we get pushback one way and the other. We put in an artificial turf field, and then there's a group that say, wish you didn't do that, and then we don't put in an artificial turf field, or the other way around. So people are looking for it and they're not looking for it. We started with Cypress Field many years ago wanting to put in an artificial turf field because we felt as though it would be the best plan for that space, given the uses that go on there. But there was a lot of pushback at the time. We have found them to be successful. We like them. We haven't decided on that yet, and I'm going to guess that Park and Rec has a lot to say about whether it is artificial turf or not. So that remains to be seen. I think it'll be interesting to see what Devotion has with their organic infill that they're recommending for their artificial turf field. So it's not decided yet. That's not a great answer, but it's not decided yet.
Yeah, in the blue and this gentleman here.
So obviously there's a ton of factors that are playing into this, and it's great to see the cost, it's great to see the space and design, implementation phase, you know, if you were to do option 1, 2, or 3. Are there other factors that have played in that haven't been discussed in terms of like parking and residential discomfort? You know, it was touched upon, that's a highly residential area. So what it'll be like for the residents in the area when the construction happens in the phases, and how to minimize, you know, the disruption and traffic and things like that.
So the question is about other factors that may have also been considered, especially those that impact the immediate neighborhood, and that's on parking, traffic, phasing, construction, and how to address those and or minimize some impacts. I think you're more qualified than I am. Yes.
The answer is yes, there are other factors. We have. This was a very quick summary, and people say I talk too much. So we really tried to distill down to the very sort of basics of what we were talking about here. But as we've worked on this, we have been talking about what are the options for parking, what are the numbers of cars that we think are required, how many permits do you have now, how many are going to be required when the population increases, what's the staff going to be. We certainly have talked about which sorts of phasing options are more palatable than others, how much pain it is for the school and for the neighborhood to go through different sorts of the construction options. And so all of those things sort of fold in to hopefully come up with the best of the options. And there's just so many variables out there. We're trying to weigh all of them. The reason why that one slide was in the beginning that sort of started to show some of the site analysis was to, without getting into it, show you that we didn't just throw some boxes around. There's sort of a lot of analysis of where we're putting additions so that they have less impact on neighborhood houses and things like that, on terrain, on traffic patterns, and things along those lines.
So, two things. One is, will this PowerPoint be available online somewhere? And the second, more complicated one is, what happens in 15, 20 years when we look down and say, okay, 2700 won't cut it? Is one thing going to be better or worse to go further from?
So the first question is, will the presentation be online? And the answer to that is yes. We'll show you at the end the BHS website, and this presentation will be on there tomorrow, and all the presentations are already on there. We're trying to keep folks up to date, very up to date on that in terms of the information flow. And then the next question is not for me, but the second question was, do any of these designs allow for further expansion if that is needed at some point in the future?
Oh, I guess I'm answering that. We do talk about which options give you more sort of ability to continue to sort of grow in the future. It is a very large school. It is a very crowded campus. And under all these options, part of the purpose of these massing diagrams is to make sure that as we talked abstractly about 2,700 students, that people understood how enormous of a task that is that we're talking about. Someone else can talk about the enrollment projections, and I didn't get involved with them, but obviously there's art and science to enrollment projections. We can look out a certain distance. In this case, because it's a high school, we're pretty assured of what's going to happen over the next number of years because those kids are here already. You saw the projections of the kids who are in the first, second, third, and fourth grades right now, and that they will be at the high school in 2021 or something like that. But beyond that, it becomes sort of an art of predicting. People are doing the best job they can. As far as I know, they're doing an excellent job of projecting what they think the maximum enrollment is going to be. But there's no magic to it.
We want to go back just a couple steps to the question around what's being done to alleviate concerns and address concerns that may be in the neighborhood, the immediate surrounding neighborhood. HMFH, and I know you're the lead architect on the Devotion site, and there's been quite a bit of work done there to not only address neighbor concerns, but also around construction and minimize the impact of that. Could you talk a little bit about what your firm and the construction that's been happening at Devotion? I think it might be instructive, or what may also happen here.
Okay, so one of the things that we believe in, I believe in, is we really sort of engage with the community, gotten to know the people around the Devotion school, people who live up and down Stedman Street. And we see this as a process that we're all sort of going along on. I think people need to understand that there's an incredible task that needs to be done here, and that we're all working to try to figure out how best to do it to maximize the outcome and minimize the impact both on the school and on the community, and maximize the outcome on both the school and the community. So at Devotion, we've had a very sort of active sort of engagement with the community, several community meetings, working with the construction manager to sort of establish a great sort of rapport with the community, a process of communication where any sorts of complaints, and I see the emails that go back and forth, some people saying, the construction traffic, the construction workers are parking where they shouldn't park, and we get the CM to really sort of get in there and enforce what the rules are. And we see other people saying, actually, it's been great so far, except those people who are speeding up and down the street. And so we're really going to a level of detail with noise, dust, traffic, circulation, safety on the Devotion site, so that at least I think people feel heard and listened to. Construction is not easy. Building something like this is not going to be easy. There's going to be a certain amount of pain. Anybody who tells you that, oh, this is going to go through in 3 years, you're going to wake up, it's all going to be done, is lying to you. We all have to sort of participate with this. There's no magic way to get through it. But by working with the community proactively, and the community working with this team proactively, is the best way of getting through it. I like to tell you what we can do and what we can't do. And when we can't do something, I like to tell you why we can't do it, and hopefully get to a level of trust as to, so that you, so if I say I can't build this without, putting an earth support system and pounding into the ground, that I'm not just, you understand that we're not just being callous and we really don't care, but we're doing everything that we can. We also, another thing, we've taken surveys when the owners want to of their properties so that we can determine if new cracks are developing or plaster is falling off or something like that, so that the contractor can sort of make them whole. And we've been monitoring vibration also on the site.
So we're about out of time, but I see there are a few more hands up. I want to just make sure we get to folks who haven't had a chance yet. So this gentleman will move next to.
You've started off the design process with 3 distinct alternatives that are well-defined and easy to explain. But design is a series of compromises, as life is a series of compromises. I'm wondering if you will consider in the future mixing and matching among those options, because there are some appealing features that you might be willing to compromise if something else could be gained.
The question is, will, as the design process goes forward, will the building committee and others be willing to consider crossing over, compromising, or mixing and matching between the different options that have been presented tonight? I think the simple answer.
I mean, very simply, the answer is yes. And so when the architects took what the architects did at the beginning, the team did at the very beginning, before beginning massing, is they took the educational plan and created really sort of these 3 descriptors, and that was the first question of everyone. Could we mix and match? Could we do, X, Y, and Z from column 1 and A and B from 2? And really the answer is simply yes. I think it's a building committee process. It's a public process. It's the sharing the information tonight then sparks the questions of, well, this makes sense in a design. So could we, no matter what, could this be included, moving forward? And I think that's a really important part of the public process around design, which I will say, I guess, goes a lot longer than the initial feasibility phase. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, sure. I'll just add that one very clear indication of that is that in our option 1 enrollment accommodation, we actually started by looking at the science labs and deciding which science labs we thought we could make do with. And I think we came up with 6 that we could reuse. As we worked with the science department, we took tours through the science labs. It was determined that really we ought to take option 2, which is replace all the science labs and put that also in option 1. So you're already seeing that happening, and it will continue to happen.
So this woman here from the purple, the gentleman in the green, and we'll finish with.
Me?
Yes.
Yeah.
The building commission has a committee for the high school expansion, which is, 17 people? And there's no neighbor in that commission. I strongly recommend that you get a neighbor, because the last time there was renovation in the high school, it was a disaster in the neighborhood. And so it would solve a lot if you had one of us on that committee. Is there any possibility?
Yes.
There
Gentleman
is
stand
one.
up and come up.
There is a neighbor.
Matt, do you want to?
Yeah, I won't come up, but I'm on the committee and I'm a neighbor. I live on Brington Road. We actually have, there's a neighbor who lives, Ian Rothman, who lives down the street, who is on the committee. He's a little further down Cypress. I believe, I don't know if.
Nick.
Oh, and Nick is,
Road. You're the student. There's one student, and I live on Welland Road, and we did have terrible problems after the renovation of 1995, et cetera, which weren't resolved for about 20 years after that finished. And I think there's a lot of leftover resentment, at least from a lot of people on Welland Road, of how long it took for us to resolve the safety of Welland Road. So I think Brington, Cypress, if you're not really up against the high school, and again, you're the student, but I think you really should invite somebody from one of the roads like Tappan or Greeno or Welland that's really going to be impacted by this construction project.
Right, Cyril Avenue doesn't really qualify. That's not really an immediate neighbor.
right, he's not an immediate abutter, nor am I. for that matter, I'm on the other
Well,
side
you're
of
a
the
little-
T.
I know.
I'm closer, but I'm not as
Closer.
affected.
I don't-
You're right, no, it's a
That's
good
true,
point,
but I think
and I think, you know, if I imagine Kip would say the same thing, I'm an architect, so I know how these processes go. There's a lot of work that happens after this moment in the process. There's a lot of opportunity for community involvement. It's a very important part of a project, especially like this. So I would imagine that there are a lot of opportunities,
Well, can
even if
people
it's not
still
on this
apply for
committee
that
right now.
committee?
I would
I mean,
say,
what-
talk to the co-chairs
Yeah.
and.
Yeah, no, I think the committee's been meeting since December, but they're all public meetings, and I think part of the question that I've heard is there are a few different pieces of this between parking, phasing, disruption, 111 Cypress, that all kind of are pieces that impact the neighborhood. And so I would say first and foremost, I think everyone on the committee, part of the reason we're doing this is that everyone on the committee wants to hear what the neighborhood's priorities are. So if 111 is still a priority, if the parking obviously is gonna be a priority, there's a giant price tag associated with it, but to the extent that that's a priority to create structured parking in the neighborhood, given the increased density, that's something that people need to hear. The phasing piece and the impact on the neighborhood. So I would just say, like, we have many guests at the meeting, and there are people who are there often do speak. So I think although the committee's been up and running for a while, this really is supposed to be a public process, and so at any rate, I would just say.
I just think you
yeah.
need more than a guest from
Yeah.
the immediate streets.
No,
think
I
you
hear
need
you.
an actual,
Yeah.
another person from the.
So let's talk afterwards,
immediate.
we'll see. Yeah, I got it, we can talk afterwards.
And also just in addition,
Well,
so.
the other thing I wanted to say is when I have tried to look on these plans on the computer and all the communication I got, and it says push a button and you see the plans, it never comes up.
Okay, so the website.
It's not working.
Okay, we'll look at it.
So make it work.
Okay.
I've tried it, several times.
And just so folks know, in terms of outreach, so for this and other community meetings, we mailed 1,100 notices to abutters and folks within, about a quarter of a mile of the high school site. The best way to be informed of every meeting that's happening is by signing up on the green sheets back there, and giving us your email address. That's just the easiest way, fastest way to communicate. And you can also check the website for updated meetings. But we do take seriously the importance of input from the immediate neighbors as well as everybody, and really want to make sure that we are reaching out to the immediate neighborhood regularly to inform folks of meetings and that sort of thing. Just the gentleman in the green in the back, and then we're going to finish with the gentleman in the orange. And folks will stay later if you have other questions as well. Just want to be mindful of folks' time. Yeah, in the back.
Have you started to develop preliminary timelines for these different options?
Yeah, we'll finish with timelines just when questions are over with.
Okay. Yeah, because as you go from option 1 to option 3, they become much more complex and messy.
Sure. Yeah.
Someone's children up to their, looks like maybe 3+ years of renovation there. And I think that's why some people mentioned 111 Cypress and lot 23. If you could possibly build something in a greenfield, maybe you're spending some extra costs up front or solving some architectural or site problems, but there's a lot of money that's spent on renovations, and the longer the project goes, you could be spending on that.
Does anyone want to? I'll go down to the timeline later, but the question was more about phasing and impact over time, and then also is there a benefit in starting from scratch in a greenfield? Does anyone want to comment on those issues?
Well, I want to just say quickly that when you see the timeline, I think it says something like the quickest possible timeline.
Aspirational, best case scenario.
Yeah.
Things can go wrong.
And as we get into phasing, it will take longer than the timeline that you'll see. I think part of the idea is to get capacity on site and going by the timeline that you'll see, even if the whole project isn't finished by then, so that you're not getting to those 30 student average class sizes that were referred to, or 27 students were referred to earlier. But the phasing does have an impact. And as if you hear me say, first we build this, then we build this, then we build this, there's a time implication with that, and the time is cost also.
Last question.
Sure. I have two related questions. First, does your planning and do the numbers also take into account renovating some core facilities such as the auditorium, which I think is sorely in need of updating and redeveloping? And is anything being done with respect to the Unified Arts Building in this plan, or any of your plans, or is it just staying as is?
Yep.
So the first part of your question, or yes, the question is, in these plans, are we accommodating renovation of some of the core facilities like the auditorium? And have we, and then the second part was, have we incorporated the Unified Arts Building into our plans? And the answer is, to the first part, yes, and it's to different extents. So that in the minimal version, where the guiding statement is the high school educates 2,000 students perfectly well right now, therefore let's just accommodate the extra 700 students, or something along those lines. We're doing minimal renovations in the balance of the building where we're not doing the additions. We're converting some science into classrooms, but we're going to be sort of taking a budget and sort of seeing how to best spin that through the classroom, through the building. As you go up to option 3, where you're really occupying the middle of the courtyard, the new construction is so closely tied to the old construction, so you're going to get extensive renovation that goes on in those options. You'll also, even from low to high, we're looking at whether or not we're replacing windows, whether or not we're insulating the exterior wall, and things along those lines. So we're very much looking at that, and that affects the costs that we look at. You saw cost ranges, for instance, we're going low to high. We did look at UAB. And UAB, Unified Arts Building, is a wonderful building, and it's got great facilities. And as we do our room utilization charts, we find that it needs a little bit in terms of extra spaces, but not very much. And so you will see, I mean, I think you saw on that chart, that sort of qualitative chart, they were doing little bits of work, but really not very much. It's a wonderful building, so we're going to improve it a little bit, but not nearly the extent of what we're talking about either at the main campus on Greeno Street or the Tappan Gym. We're going to look at that engineering space, which used to be the auto shop. We're going to look at how we can do a sculpture studio. I think we need an extra drawing studio. We're looking at how to work all of that stuff in there, but it's not really a huge renovation to that building.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through some timelines and next steps quickly. This is the website to go to. It's part of the main website, or you can go to the district website and you'll see a building projects tab there, or link, and you can get either night school information or high school information. That's the direct link there. So just in terms of this spring, so design alternatives presented to the building committee and community. It's happening in March. So here in March. In April, the building committee will be selecting a preferred design, so one of the paths you saw here, okay? And then just in terms of the feasibility phase, so we're just talking about feasibility phase, that then triggers the request to town meeting to get funding for the schematic design phase. So in any school building project, there are a number of stages. There's visioning and developing education plan. There's the feasibility phase which we're in now. And you go to schematic design phase, which is a deeper level of design and planning. That will answer many questions that have been raised today with much more specifics. Then you go through a process of securing the funding from, in this case, the town. And then you go to construction drawings and ultimate construction. So I'll talk about those right now. I'll talk about those at the time for the rest of that process in a moment. This is some of the public engagement that's happening right now. So you see building committee meetings, those are the upcoming meetings that are scheduled. The public is always welcome to those. Those are typically in the evenings, most often at the high school. So they're close to the scene there. Community meetings, we'll have another one in April to give folks another update and get input. And then working meetings with BHS staff and also partner organizations that work closely with BHS to get their input on design alternatives and the progress of the feasibility stage. And then we're also going through the process of working with other boards and commissions in town, advisory committee, obviously, around financing and the budget, and really the cost of the schematic design phase, which is next. Parks and Recreation about Cypress Field, and other, and Tappan, of course, and then the other boards and commissions as well. So a lot of folks, as we have to do and necessary to do to create the best approach, will have quite a bit of input. And then going forward, again, aspirational timeline, as Pip's already said, there are a number of reasons that we'll fall off of this. It is the best case scenario, but the idea that we finish feasibility stage, like I said, move towards the schematic design this summer into fall, complete the schematic design. At fall town meeting, again, this is all best case scenario, town meeting would have to vote on whether or not there would be a debt exclusion vote by the town, by voters and residents. That could potentially happen sometime in winter 2018, so December, January, February, that sort of thing. Again, I'm talking in broad brush strokes here. Best case scenario, groundbreaking for construction in January 2019, sorry. Duration is 29 months, and going back to your question, depends heavily on the duration depends heavily on phasing, obviously, and which design path the community selects and how to go forward. The best case scenario would be fall 2021. Construction would be complete or significantly complete. Again, I just want to lay out really the steps, understanding that the timeline is.
So this construction complete is for which option?
Well, that's a good question.
The question was, construction complete is for which option? And I would say, if you, let's just think about the options. Option one, where you first take down the Tappan academic wing, and then you're building a cluster of classrooms on Tappan and Greenough, and you're building something in the back of what I call the administration building. That could be completed by 2021. So then if you're doing option two, and there's a second phase, that once you do that, you're then taking down the Schlunch gym, and you're building a new academic building there. That's going to take 18 to 24 months more. And the reason why it's faster than the first phase is because you do all the shop drawings and the submittals and things like that as you're going through the construction for the first phase. The second phase will go faster than the second phase.
So this is option one.
Best case scenario.
Yeah.
I just want to understand.
And the significant thing is, that's the point at which the chart that was shown earlier, the average classroom size goes to 27.5 students. But we hope, regardless of which option we take, we're going to bring a lot of classrooms into service at that point, and that will start to relieve that overcrowding, even if we're not done with the whole project at that point.
I just wanted to know, how long, because this makes it sound like we'll be done. Yeah, so it's
And that's why you hear us.
That's why you hear me
Trying to
backtrack.
be clear about that. So let me stop there.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
So first of all, thank you all for coming. We will take this link and we'll distribute it around, and so please send it to friends, neighbors, others who you think are going to be interested in this. I also just want to say that there were a number of substantive issues that were brought up about 111 Cypress, about turf on the field, about parking, about phasing, some other pieces. And so if you or others that you know have very strong feelings about this, please let us know. This is sort of it's designed to get input from people. And so anyway, we'd love to hear from you or anyone else on those issues, or anything else, but those are the ones that just came up here.
I think other folks will be here for a little more time if you have more questions, ask personally. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.